On this episode of my bread series, I'll be showing you the simplest way to bring my awesome low-carb white bread clone back to your keto life. In another video, I show you how to do this with a stand mixer and self-bake, but for now, we're going to jump into my Breadmaker edition. The standard Western diet has become far more about convenience than nutrition, and one of the things our society is hooked on is white bread. It's not surprising then that people starting out on keto and low carb really miss and crave this mainstay of daily life. Thankfully though, with a lot of trial and error, I've perfected my best white bread keto clone to date, and my recipe works perfectly for sandwiches, burgers, and especially my favourite, toast. Now this recipe isn't really for you if you're just starting keto, and if you're still very focused on losing weight, be aware that it can slow your progress down if you overindulge. But if you're on target and you want to enjoy this staple, you can make this anytime. My favourite way to make this is using a Breadmaker. Now lots of people buy these amazing machines thinking they're going to start making artisan bread every day, and then they use them once or twice before stuffing them in a cupboard to gather dust. But if you're on keto, I promise you this machine is your best friend and an absolute must-have. They don't have to be expensive either. You can pick up a really good quality Breadmaker second-hand for as little as £25 on places like Facebook Marketplace if you're prepared to hunt around. The Breadmaker is a miracle of engineering, and it takes all of the guesswork and the laborious mixing and rising out of the process and gives you a perfect loaf in around 3 hours. So let's dive in. So our ingredients for this again today are 75 grams of almond flour, 240 grams of vital wheat gluten. That's where the bread gets its natural elasticity. That's the same for keto bread or normal bread. Then we're just using 1/4 teaspoon of xanthan gum, a tiny bit, a pinch of pink Himalayan salt. You don't want too much in there. Salt will kill the yeast and stop the rise. Then we have 40 grams of powdered erythritol. Any sweetener is good, but you can use the keto sweetener of your choice. Then we have 40 grams of softened salted butter, 2 eggs, and then my secret ingredient, this is 30 grams of bamboo flour. Now bamboo flour is very popular in Asia and their cuisine, but it's almost zero carbohydrate. It's a white fluffy powder, as you can see, so it's absolutely perfect to go into a white bread clone. We're going to put in 1 teaspoon of honey. That's just to feed the yeast. The yeast will take all of the carbs and the sugar out of that, so it won't be left in your final loaf. Now I'm going to add 4 drops of stevia. That's just to counterbalance the erythritol flavour, but also white bread in the West is very sweet, so that's just going to help to trick your palate. For the yeast, I always find I get the best rise when I'm using these simple foil packs, 7 grams of instant dried yeast. You can pick these up in any supermarket for 56p for about 6 sachets. They're absolutely fantastic. I've tried other yeasts, the ones that come in open cans, but I don't know what it is, maybe the exposure to the air. I never get the rise out of them that I do with these, so I highly recommend using these in your loaf. Finally, we're just going to use 1 cup of lukewarm water. That's 1 cup or 250 millilitres. Now on my stand mixer edition of this recipe, we have to sieve all of the dry ingredients at this point, but you really don't need to do that with these machines. But the order in which you put the ingredients in the machine does matter, and it probably is the most technical part of the whole bake. So with that in mind, we're going to start with our 1 cup of water. To that I'm going to add my 4 drops of stevia, 2, 3, 4. Next, my 2 eggs. I always crack eggs into a small container first, just to make sure I'm not putting in any shell. 1. And there's 2. Now we just want to lightly beat those eggs, so I'm going to grab a fork, and break those up. There. Now, before I add in all my dry ingredients, I am going to mix them together first, just because that's going to make it easier for the machine. So there is my bamboo fibre. There is my vital wheat gluten, my almond flour, my xanthan gum, my pinch of salt, and my erythritol. And again, just have a fork, stir those up. Stick around later for my tip about pre-making bags of these dry ingredients up. That's a real time saver and massively convenient. There. Just pour that in over the top of the water. The aim here is to keep the water separate from the yeast until the machine starts to mix it. There. Then we make a small well in the top of the dry ingredients, and that's where we're going to sprinkle in our dry yeast. Sprinkle that over the top. Then our teaspoon of honey. Remember, that teaspoon of honey is going to get eaten by the yeast, not you. Drizzle that over. That's going to activate the yeast when the yeast gets wet. And then lastly, take your small chunks of butter and spread them around the outside of the dry mix and around the outside of the chamber. At this point, I don't usually weigh this stuff out. I like to just eyeball it, and with a teaspoon, just put in enough, and that's fine. And that's it. I'm going to close that down. I'm on a 3-hour medium bake here, and all I have to do now is start that machine running. Now I'm using a fairly standard 1 kilogram loaf setting on my machine, which takes about 3 hours, but I can just leave this now to do its magic, and in the meantime, here are your macros. Welcome back to the Low Carb Cook. Our loaf is still happily churning away in the Breadmaker, and while that's happening, I want to show you a way to really lower the overall cost of making these loaves and bring back some super convenience, and that's through bulk buying and preparation. Now, I always bulk buy my ingredients from sites like Amazon, Real Food Source and buywholefoodsonline.co.uk, and this can drastically lower the cost of making these loaves down to around £2.50 each. Then, for convenience, I'll spend half a day once a year weighing out all of the dry ingredients for a loaf and popping them into Ziploc freezer bags and popping in a sealed sachet of fast-acting dried yeast. That way I can just grab a bag anytime and throw it into the Breadmaker easily to have a loaf ready within 3 hours. Now I always have 20 or so bags of these ingredients ready to go in the cupboard at any time, making a loaf super easy to bake. And hey presto, 3 hours later, we have a perfect loaf. Let's just turn the machine off. Open it up, see what we have. Wear your oven gloves. This is pretty hot inside, but you just twist this off. There we go, and look at that. You can see in its baking chamber there, that has risen beautifully. Not as well as they do when you bake them yourself in the oven, but for an everyday loaf, that's absolutely wonderful. And don't forget the paddle that does all that kneading and mixing will be stuck in the bottom. Mine doesn't come out of the unit. And there it is, one really perfect loaf of bread, and even sounds like a proper loaf of bread. Now that's out of the machine, leave it to cool down. In my experience, if you can leave this for 24 hours, it will slice really cleanly, and that makes it far easier to control the portions and your carb counts. Unfortunately, in my house, it doesn't usually last that long. And I don't want to keep you waiting. You want to see inside. So let's take a slice and see how this turned out. There, beautiful, perfect structure inside, soft, squeezable, just like any loaf of bread you would buy in an artisan bread shop. This really is the simplest, most basic recipe and the easiest way to make it. If you fancy something a bit more adventurous, check out my channel for more in the bread series like brown bread, tiger loaf, sun-dried tomato and olive, and good old bread rolls. You'll also find loads of great everyday low carb and keto recipe ideas to help support your low carb lifestyle. Subscribe to the Low Carb Cook and hit the bell icon to be notified when anything new is uploaded. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Hey, thanks for watching the Low Carb Cook. If you enjoyed this episode, why not watch one of our playlists or this recommended video? Click on the logo below to subscribe. Join us on any of our social pages, or if you'd like to show a bit more love, you can support the channel on buymeacoffee.com using the link below. For even more great stuff, check out the website, thelowcarbcook.com.